Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode around all the ways that we perform in our lives. And I think it's really funny that the episode today is about perfectionism because I just 3 minutes ago hit the record button to record this podcast episode and realized I hadn't even plugged in my microphone. It was in the closet. I was clearly not in the perfecting mode this morning. So all good. It's just kind of entertaining, these things that come together the way that they do. I also, before we dive into perfecting, want to point out, especially for those who are watching on YouTube, I kind of tweaked out my back 2 days ago. I have some back problems that are typically very minor back problems until they're not minor. And I drove back to Colorado from Minnesota. So at 8 hours one day, 5 hours the next, and then went and weeded my garden immediately, without stretching, without doing anything for 2 hours. And yeah, my back just seized up when I was out there weeding. So yeah, it's getting better. And also if you see me shifting around or moving, sometimes it needs to do that so that it can stay a little more limber and not seize up again. So that is the space that I'm coming from today, forgetting I need a microphone for the podcast and my back being in pain. So perfecting, that's what we are diving into today. And it's interesting with this perfecting piece, way more so than proving and pleasing, the first 2 episodes that we covered in this series. I've talked a lot more about perfectionism myself and worked with a lot more people that would identify as being a perfectionist, way more than the other 2. And I think part of that's because, I wrote a book with the subtitle of An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules was How to Let Go of Perfect and Live Your Truth. And I used to run a group coaching program called Beyond Perfect. So it made sense that I was attracting people into that program that would have identified as perfectionists. And then interestingly, I was thinking about this, that we don't have a noun for proving. You might say oh, I'm a perfectionist, or I have some perfectionism behaviors, or I'm a people pleaser, or I'm working on people pleasing, but you don't really ever say well, I'm a prover, or really I'm working on proving, even though that's actually what's often beneath those other things. And particularly perfectionism, there can be a lot of proving underneath perfectionism, trying to prove your worth. That is often the root of what perfectionism is. So yeah, I think it's just an interesting thing to think about, that, proving is such a big thing, but we don't talk about it that much. But perfecting, which we're diving into today, we talk about a lot. We talk about it a lot in our culture. Sometimes it's even viewed as, that positive way of answering an interview question, what's one of your weaknesses? Oh, I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I make everything as good as humanly possible, kind of in that realm of oh, I can work too hard, those weaknesses that you think won't be viewed as weaknesses. So as why you're saying them, which is also such a perfectionist thing, just needed to point that out. But yeah, perfectionism. And last week in the episode around pleasing, I talked about how I never really viewed myself as a people pleaser until I started digging into my own patterns and my own behaviors and saw that, oh, wow, no, I do really have some people pleasing tendencies that I need to be aware of and need to start breaking down and unraveling. And perfectionism was the same. I did not view myself as a perfectionist, an overachiever and an overdoer. Yes, I think I would have described myself as an overachiever since I was 14 years old. And I always said yes to too many things. Those I was very aware of, even proud of for a good portion of my life. But I was very aware of those. But perfectionist, I did not put into the same category as overachiever, which is a little unusual. I think a lot of people would put those in very much the same category. But for me, I viewed perfectionist, or a perfectionism, or someone who is a perfectionist, as being very perfect when it came to the details of things. I have to read a Word document 8 times and make sure there's no mistakes in it. Or like, I'm not allowed to make any of those little tiny detail-oriented mistakes. My house always has to be perfect. And I have to get into every single corner for every single dust bunny that might be there. And it needs to look perfect when anyone is coming over to look at the house. And, all of these things around like making things look perfect in very detail-oriented ways. And that's just not me. Like, I can be in the details, I can cope with the details, but I am not an overly detail-oriented person, which I think is why perfectionism didn't show up there for me, because that's just not my preferred way of operating. But then I learned the actual definition of perfectionism, which is essentially that you hold yourself and sometimes others to unrealistically high standards. So not just excellent, not just achieving for doing well, but really that unrealistically high standards, and then judging yourself when you don't reach those high standards. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not a perfectionist when it comes to the details. I don't have unrealistically high standards for that. Like, I don't feel bad if I have a typo. I'll change it when I notice it, but I don't feel badly about it. But when it comes to the big things, I am without a doubt a perfectionist, holding myself to really unrealistically high standards. And this is what a lot of An Overachiever's Guide to Breaking the Rules was about, because it was about recognizing where those standards came from and how I was performing according to them, and learning to let that go. Because and this is how it showed up for me, lots of different ways. So for example, when I started my business, I felt like I had to be successful at everything I tried, which I wasn't. I failed at a whole ton of things. I felt like I needed to match my corporate salary right away. Also didn't do that. So a trend here, especially when it started my business, of having these really high expectations and just simply you're not fulfilling them. It's not going to be perfect all of the time. I felt like I had to answer, every question in a Q&A and a speaking engagement absolutely perfectly, off the top of my head. I just better remember every single thing that I would remember had I had a half an hour to think about that response and be super thoughtful about it. And I really, really had a hard time with making mistakes, especially two of a similar mistake. I felt like, okay, I made a mistake. I've learned from it. I should move on and never make that mistake again, which is just not realistic. But again, this goes to that definition of having unrealistically high standards for yourself. And again, sometimes for others, we can be a perfectionist towards others as well. And that was me for sure. And so not only was I holding myself to these really high standards, particularly when it came to anything related to success or life decisions as well. And that, again, not wanting to make two similar mistakes at different points in my life. But then the other part of this was feeling bad when I didn't live up to that expectation. So there was the having the expectation to start out with, and then how I felt about it: bad, anxious, ashamed, worried, stressed, all of those things when I didn't live up to that expectation. So for example, if I said the wrong thing, maybe a definitively wrong thing in a meeting, but then I would feel overly bad about it. I should have known better. I should have said the right thing. I should have learned this lesson a long time ago. Or if I'd gotten that feedback, I've talked about this in other podcast episodes, that I could be too direct. And I then held up myself to the standard, to be fair, a standard I'd been given to not be too direct, but to still share my ideas. But then when I was direct in a meeting, I really worried about whether I was too much, even though I didn't even know how I was being perceived. No one had given me that feedback in that exact moment, but I really worried about it, and worried that I wasn't living up to this standard. I felt like I should be able to walk on this tightrope of the exact right thing to say and the exact right way to say it while still being authentic, of course. Just ridiculous, because not all of those things are going to be able to happen all at the same time. And then those mistakes, like if I made the same mistake twice, like 2 times kind of in a row, I made housing decisions that like logically made sense, but went against my intuition, and both were total disasters. Like they were not good decisions. And this first time I didn't have that perfectionism. Like I noticed it and I was like, oh yeah, my body was telling me that this was not a good idea. I should have listened to it. Point taken. But then the next time around, it did the exact same thing and I didn't listen to it. I listened only to logic and it was terrible. And I go into great detail of the story because it's also kind of funny. It involves sewers backing up and mice. And yes, it involves a whole lot of things. That story is in Grounded Wildness. And I didn't listen to my intuition. And I felt awful about it because I felt like I'd already learned this lesson and I should have made a better decision. And I was really, really hard on myself about those things. And I worried about them, stressed about them, and was super hard on myself about it. And then in other areas of my life, like I've talked a lot about my body and, having this high standard, this perfectionist standard of what my body was supposed to look like, which it never has and never will look like that, standard out there of quote unquote perfection. And that not being able to live up to that standard caused so much shame in my body, but also shame because I felt like I should be eating better. I felt like I should be able to control the way I was eating. And I couldn't live up to that perfectionist standard that I both held for myself and was given to me by our culture around us. So yeah, it was shame. It was shame. And this is what perfecting is. Like I was performing through perfecting. And then felt anxiety and shame when I couldn't perform to that high standard that I had in my head, whether it was related to my body, whether it was related to my voice and how I was showing up, making mistakes or lack of making mistakes, trying to be successful at the first time I tried something in my business or in other parts of my career. And so I had the high standards to begin with. And then when I couldn't perform to them, I felt the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the shame, all of those things, which is, super fun. And this is exactly what perfecting is. You're trying to perform to the standard, conform to that expectation. And when you can't, you feel badly about it. You are trying to live up to the rules that are handed to you, those perfection rules, and you try and conform to them and live there all the time. And when you can't, you feel it. That inner critic swoops in telling you like, you should have known better. You should have worked harder. You should have done something differently. Maybe even meaner than that. Like you're stupid or you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know any better, but you should have known better. I mean, just like awful, awful things that perfectionist inner critic can tell you. It's terrible. And that's what perfecting is. This is how we try and perform through perfecting, is by conforming to the standard. And then all of those mean inner critic things that happen and how we feel about it when we can't perform to that standard. And I want to be clear again, I probably said it in every episode, maybe of this entire podcast since it started a year ago, which is that this is not your fault. It's not your fault. Perfectionism is not your fault. It's these rules that were handed you that tell you need to live up to this perfectionist standard, this unrealistically high standard. Some of which has to do with gender, some of which has nothing to do with gender. Like, if anyone's seen the Barbie movie, which I personally thought was like the best movie I have seen in years. I loved it on so many levels. It was so creative. It gave so many great messages. It was funny. I laughed. I cried. If I could be like a one-woman ad for the Barbie movie, I'm going to do it right now. It was so good. But I think of that speech that has been shared so many times on social media that America Ferrera makes of like just how hard it is to be a woman. Go back and read those words. Like those are the perfectionist standards. That is the level of performance that the rules are telling you need to be. And it is impossible. It's simply not going to happen. And yeah, I need to take a breath here because I feel it. I think we all feel it. I felt it really deeply for a long time in my life, but like I wasn't living up to some standard that was out there, that I was falling behind or that I wasn't that I was behind. I was behind the expectations of what I was supposed to be, not realizing for so long that this was a problem with those standards, with those expectations, with the rules, as opposed to I thought it was a problem with me. And that's where the proving came in, was like proving that I still was worthy in spite of not living up to this perfection expectation that's out there, in spite of not being able to live up to the rules that you have been handed, that I've been handed, that I felt that. I felt that. And so I want that to settle in with you. Like, it's a problem with the rules, not with you. It is a problem with the rules, not with you. And in performing, one of those first two episodes when we talked about performing and with proving and pleasing, I really just wanted to raise your awareness around those things. I didn't offer any sort of tools. But with perfecting, I didn't just want to leave you here. I didn't just want to leave you with this hard thing and this mean inner critic that comes in telling you to do more, be more, work harder, berating you, and that self-judgment that comes in when you don't live up to these rules and expectations. Like I couldn't just leave you there and be like, okay, pay attention, pay attention to all those things. I do want you to pay attention and start to notice the rules, the absolutely impossible rules that you have been handed. That's really important. And I wanted to actually give you a tool. So the tool here is self-compassion, because with perfectionism, with perfecting, there isn't self-compassion. There's self-judgment, there's self-berating, there's all sorts of other things that you are doing to yourself and that the rules are telling you that you should be feeling badly about. Self-compassion is not one of them. So self-compassion is a huge antidote to perfectionism, like really getting to that root. So what does that actually look like? I think we talk a lot about self-compassion, and we don't really usually talk about like, what does it actually mean? What does it look like to practice self-compassion? And Dr. Kristen Neff is like the guru of self-compassion. So if you want to dive deeper into self-compassion, I highly recommend you just Googling her. She has a bunch of books and all sorts of resources out there. But she has researched 3 components of self-compassion. And I turned these into what I call the 3 C's of self-compassion, which are community, consideration, and curiosity. So those 3 words are mine, not hers, but they represent her work and what her research has said are the 3 components of self-compassion. So what those mean, and this is what you practice, this is like what you include when you are practicing self-compassion. The first one is curiosity, which is just getting curious, noticing without judgment what's going on for you, what you're feeling, what the inner critic is saying, even if that inner critic is judging, trying to take a curious approach to it. So just being mindful, noticing, being curious. So that's part of it. Community is the second part, meaning telling yourself you're not alone. Other people have experienced this. They are experiencing it right now. It's normal. It's common. We are in community with each other in this experience. So telling yourself that whatever you're experiencing, whatever you are feeling is normal and other people have also experienced it. And then the final one is consideration, as in treating yourself with consideration. So talking to yourself like you would a good friend. So if that inner critic is telling you, if like a situation happens where you make a mistake and you're telling yourself, oh, I feel like I should have known better. I feel terrible. Here's all the awful things. I should have worked harder to make sure that mistake didn't happen. I should have been more self-aware. I should have known that this was going to happen and I shouldn't have done it. Da, 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 da. If a friend came and told those things to you out loud, what would you say to that friend? And then say those same things to yourself in actual words out loud, in your head, and writing it down in a journal, any of the above. Treating yourself like you would a friend. because often we don't really do that. Like, we have compassion for most other people around us way more than you have compassion for yourself. So getting in the habit of talking to yourself like you would a friend starts to build that self-compassion muscle. And I also want to point out that self-compassion truly is a practice. I've said that many times already, and I want to reiterate it and be direct about it, that this isn't something like, oh, you're just talented at. No, it is something that you do. Self-compassion is a practice that you do. So when you notice that inner critic, when you notice the stress, the anxiety, the shame, the feeling ashamed for not living up to these standards, feeling like you should have known better, done more, worked harder, blah, 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 all the things, practice self-compassion. And it helps too if you can take a deep breath and maybe put your hands somewhere on your body that feels comforting, like maybe on your thighs, maybe putting a hand or two hands on your heart, or even giving yourself a little hug, or just kind of like rubbing your arms in a compassionate way. And then being curious, telling yourself this is normal, that other people experience it, and talking to yourself like you would a friend. That's all that self-compassion is. And does it make things go away 100% right in the moment? No, but it really helps. And it is a practice that you can build over time. Over time. It is the antidote to perfecting, at least from a practice perspective in the moment. So when that inner critic comes up, start practicing self-compassion. And we will get into the deeper pieces of like what I would call like the root causes of why you feel the need to perfect in the first place, and unraveling them, which is really the root. So self-compassion is an antidote in the moment, but really getting to the root causes and unraveling them, that's a whole different level. And we'll do that in a couple of weeks in September. Once these 4 episodes are done, I promise we will be talking about how you can break free from performing. And that's what Grounded Wildness is about. This is the first part, like these 4 chapters or these 4 parts of the podcast that we're going through are part of the book. It's called The Years of Performing. The Years of Performing. And then we talk about the break, as in breaking free and breaking through and breaking open and breaking towards not performing anymore, breaking towards grounded wildness. And then the whole second half of the book, or it's really 2/3, is all practices on getting grounded and wild and staying there. So this is exactly what the book is about, is breaking this all down so that you can be free of it more and more and more of the time. Be free of this weight of having to perform and like wear this armor, this crap that we've been told we have to carry with us that you do not have to carry with you. It is time to let it all go. And that's what we're going to get into in the podcast episode in September. That's what Grounded Wildness is all about. And also next week, we're going to be talking about rebelling, which is the 4th way of performing. And it's like exactly the same and totally different at the same time. And it's going to be a really fun episode. And you might bring up some things in you that you've never thought about before. Because when I talk to people about this, they're usually surprised that rebelling is in there. And they're like, wait a second, tell me more about that. Like, how is rebelling part of performing? So we're going to dive into all that, and it's going to be really fun. And also, hopefully in that episode, I'm crossing my fingers, Grounded Wildness is almost at the printer. Like hopefully this week as I'm recording this, it's at the printer, which means it is just a matter of weeks before it gets into your hands. And I should have an actual release date for you when I record this episode next week. I am hoping that I have a real release date for you. And either way, the book is available for pre-sale if you're in the US on my website now. And then you'll be the first to get it. And even if, say, I'm just making up a number here, the release date is October 24th. If I get the books on October 11th, you're going to be getting the book on October 11th. I'm going to be sending it out on October 11th or 12th, the day after they arrive. So even if there's technically a release date, if you order the book during pre-sale now, I mean, it's just kind of available, you'll get it as soon as I get the books. Because I've noticed that this happens, oftentimes. It's kind of like when you wait for a dinner reservation and they tell you it's going to be 45 minutes because that's the longest that it might take. And they don't want to disappoint you or they don't want to anger customers. But oftentimes after 20 minutes, you're like, oh, the buzzer is dinging. Our table's ready. That might happen with this too. So I will set a release date that is based on kind of the long estimate. And if it gets there early, if these 2,000 books are delivered to my house early, then I will ship them out early to you if you buy during the pre-sale. So we'll put the link in my show notes, but that's also on my website, heatherwhelpley.com/grounded wildness. And even if I don't have a release date for next week, I will be announcing it to my email list as soon as I know it. As soon as I know all the details, that's where they go first, is my email list. So I'll also put a link in the show notes to join my email list, so you can be part of all of those firsts. And there's also going to be some things in the coming weeks that I'm only going to offer to my email list, like some cool things, like being able to be part of a brand new keynote that I am developing and like the first to hear it and give some feedback and get that content. So there's gonna be some cool things out there. So go ahead and sign up for my email list as well. And then you'll be in the know. You'll be in the Grounded Wildness community now and forevermore, which is really, this is what it's all about. Building a community of women who are breaking free from performing, breaking those rules with purpose so that you can have greater joy and greater freedom in your life and create change. Be a part of a community that's creating change and allowing you to be free and be yourself. That's what it's all about. That's what the Grounded Wildness community is all about. So join the email list, get Grounded Wildness on pre-sale, and then we will see you back here next week for rebelling. I'm excited. It's a really fun topic. We'll see you then. Bye.